Hello and welcome to Artefact Live. My name's Scott MacArthur, and this is the first time that I've broadcast on a Tuesday, so it's a little bit of an experiment for us. But if you haven't been here before, what we talk about is storytelling, and this came from years of experience working in business as a consultant, working as an HR professional, but also just as a human being. And I begin to understand that storytelling is actually really, really important. It's something that surprisingly I don't see as often as you would think in organizations, and even with standing in the pub having a drink with somebody, people don't tend to tell as many stories as I would like them to. Now, there's a reason for that, and the reason is this: that I think stories are critical to our development as humans. And one of the things that you'll hear me say a lot, if you've not tuned in before, you'll hear me say this a lot, is that facts tell, but stories sell. And today's organizations and many people are stuck on the facts bit. And the reason that I created Artefact, you might notice in the word art and fact, is that I think you have to become almost an artistic scientist. You have to think differently about how we tell stories. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason, which is perhaps the most fundamental, is that I think that stories are a way of experiencing, reading other stories or hearing other stories are a way of experiencing the world as other people see it. And that means that stories create empathy or help you become more empathetic towards other people's experiences. And you know what? I think we need that in the world today more than we've ever needed it. And I believe that good stories can act as an empathy engine. So welcome. This is my 20th episode, and it's a humdinger. I've got a couple of brilliant guests who are both good friends of mine, but they're both very clever. So I might go very quiet today, which I know is quite unusual for me, but I might go quiet because they're so clever. But we're going to look at predicting the future through storytelling. And that might not at first seem like an obvious marriage, but it is, and we'll explain why. But before anything else, I'd like to introduce my guests, and I'll put the cameras on. So guys, are you ready? You got your, yeah, you're okay. You got your pajamas on under the table. So I'd like to introduce to you Julian Burton, who's the chap with the beard, and Tom Stanhope, who's the chap. Well, I don't know what to say about you, Tom Stanhope. The baldy one. Okay, that was your idea, not mine. I couldn't possibly. You've both got a bit short of hair here. So welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Welcome.
Very
Thanks
well.
a lot, Scott. Very good.
Thank you so much for being here.
So what I'd like you both to do, if you don't mind, is give my audience an introduction, because many of them won't have met you before. So Julian, if I could ask you just to say, what it is you do, and why you do it. There you go. Two nice big questions to start with.
Well, hi. So my name's Julian Burton. I'm a visual artist and a coach and facilitator, and I work with individuals, teams, organizations. And the main thing that I do, my son, when he was 9 years old, he said, my dad makes pictures of problems so people can talk about them.
Wow.
So particularly in organizations, I make pictures of wicked problems that you can't solve rationally. Then I help teams create, build a new story. And then pictures are very powerful at starting new conversations. So I'm really interested in the visual metaphors and visual stories of change. Start really good conversations.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julian. Thank you. I love that story about your son. It's an absolutely beautiful summary of what you do. It's glorious. Thank you. So, Tom?
Well,
are we having some connection problems with you, Tom?
Yeah.
I think we are.
So my name is Tom Stanhope, and can you see me now?
Now.
Not great. It's
Shall I leave? I'll leave and come. I'll leave and rejoin. It might be that. So
okay.
bear with me a second. I will be back.
At all. Trust the filmmaker to be the one that's got a difficult picture, Julian.
I just work with the bits of paper and a pencil.
Yeah, well, analog is always going to outlast digital. It's quite funny. It's one of the lessons I've had over the last probably 6 months, working with people on camera all the time. The ones with the more complex setups have the most problems.
Well, here's a good story for you. The Apollo mission, they spent a lot of money creating a really special pen that wrote in gravity.
Oh.
And what did the Russians do? Very can-do, basic pencil.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. But it is sometimes we do overcomplicate things. Hi, thanks, Graham, for saying hi. How you doing? Nice to see you, Graham. Thanks for joining us again. It is interesting because one of the themes I would like to tease out today is how we get across our messages for the future, or even for the present, Julian. You know, how we get them across, and I often think that we overcomplicate things. You know, we tell. I mean, I know he's not the most popular politician in the world anymore, but I remember Tony Blair. You know, when he was asked what his role was, he said education, education, education. And at the time, regardless of what you think of what he did afterwards, it made a huge impact because he said that's what we're going to focus on. You know, and it did work. Yeah. It did work.
Well, I mean, I have a story. A friend of mine used to work in the NHS, and she was privy to a 11 Downing Street health policy discussion many years ago, and all the way through the formal discussions, blah 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 blah. In the coffee breaks, all these ministers talking about, oh, how's your granddad's bunions? You know, I'm going to hospital. So their own stories of care, were influencing the policy.
My goodness, very good, very good. It just makes this power of story so obvious that it's you know. Tom, how's that sound? Your picture's still not normal as good as it normally is, Tom. Internet.
So sorry, I think it's saying that I've got a sort of 5 out of 10 network.
Welcome to modern storytelling. It's not coming over at all, Tom, unfortunately.
Always technology, eh? This is and see what happens. Talk about science fiction.
Yeah, hang on and we'll see. Let me just I'll give an introduction to you. Can you hear us?
I'll give
yeah. I'll put you off for a minute. See if you can have a go.
I can. So
right, Julian, just you and I at the moment. I think poor Tom's struggling a bit. So what I'd like to talk about, and we can. I mean, science fiction is one of the things I'm very interested in, and I'm a big reader of. And I'm sure people are wondering what on earth is he going to talk about science fiction in relation to, you know, streaming on LinkedIn and on Facebook. But I think personally that science fiction is in effect the story of change. Because it's about how societies change, how people change, how technology changes, etc., etc., etc. And for that, I've always been very interested in it. But over the last few years, Julian, I mean, you and I have worked a lot together. I hugely admire what you do in terms of trying to make sense in organizations and creating, don't let me put words in your mouth, but visual narratives, if you like, for those organizations. And the pictures that we did together and I've done with other visual artists is the part of it that's been most powerful is let's co-create whatever, a vision of the future. And individuals in organizations love that. You know, they love to think that, because when they've got their heads down and they're having a hard day, and then suddenly, you know, they're asked to think about what they would like it to be like, you know, people are attracted to that. Is that fair from the work that you do? Does that sound fair?
Absolutely. And you know, it gives hope, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Spark the imagination, create hope. I mean, I'm working. I know this might resonate with some people. Working in organisations a lot. Everybody for years has been talking about how do we improve collaboration? How do we work collectively? How are we aligned?
Yeah.
And they very rarely can say what their vision is for that. They don't know what it's like to have a fantastic team, to feel they belong. So I'm interested in science fiction that would be very culture based. You know, not AI or tech or you know, space.
Yes.
What could our culture? What could our world be like if we could collaborate the way we really want to do, but we don't want to say it yet?
Yeah. Now, if we could part that's a brilliant thought experiment to do, and there are some writers in that space which I think we're both aware of. But let me just give the audience a little bit of a very short history lesson, then we're going to play a little video just to get you on the same page as in where we're trying to go with this. So there is actually an academic underpinning to what we're talking about today. And indeed, there's a particular department in MIT which absolutely focus on storytelling and how it shapes the future. So there are people who believe that the generative nature that Julian mentioned earlier is something we can build into our stories to change ourselves, organizations, and as Julian just wonderfully said, cultures, which I think is very powerful. And the way that this has developed over the decades and indeed thousands of years came from, now if you've listened to the show regularly, you'll know we've spoken about tribal cultures, and we've spoken about cave art, and we've spoken about how there's some evidence that creating visual stories came before our oral stories. And this diagram, I mean, it's a bit cluttered, but it basically says, where did we start? We started talking, in groups and tribes, creating metaphors, predicting the future, reflecting the present, suggesting stories that were important from the past that we can learn from. But that then started to change when the printing press came along, and all these different media started to pop out. And you're familiar with all of these as publishing, design. The design's important. I'll come back to design, the visual arts, cinema experience. And that has then in the last few years started to morph again. And this phrase, world building, which I'm not sure if you've heard of before, but this is one of the archetypes in science fiction. How there are like little codices you can buy that teach you how to think as how to build a new world. You'll be familiar with the classics like Lord of the Rings, where J.R.R. Tolkien created Middle Earth. You've probably come across Frank Herbert's Dune, and it's going to be all over the media shortly with the release of the new film. And these were world builders. They created worlds. And for me, this is the bit that I would like us to talk about, Julian, because I think world building is at the heart of what I talk about in Artifact. The idea that art plus science creates a good story. And as I said at the beginning, I think this art scientist idea it's becoming a new form of storytelling, and I believe stories can change the world. I absolutely believe that, and that's how I finish my show every week. To think about your stories, because those stories can change the world. They can be generative. Now, I know that's a slightly academic sounding word, but I think stories can change the world. I think it's absolutely critical that we understand that as part of this group. Does that resonate, Julian?
Oh, totally. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking of how they could. The heart of everything is our identities, and I've heard a story told by a social science writer that, and this is very simplistic and apocryphal, but before Martin Luther King,
right?
This is what this academic was saying. The black people in America saw themselves as black. Through the life of Martin Luther King and his speeches, he didn't have one narrative. His whole life and his speeches were a narrative. After that, they saw themselves primarily, firstly, as Americans. So, it's kind of meta level, but this guy says they shifted their identity.
Very good. I mean, what the academics would call that is a hyper real story. At that stage, at the early stage, it's a hyper real story that reflects a bigger picture. So absolutely, that's a beautiful example. I'll maybe come back to that, because there are some other thoughts in that space about how that story, and that's a great example, but that type of story is now becoming what they call a never-ending story. And I'm not talking about the fantasy film. These are endless stories with no end. But let's play a little video. Now, this is a chap that I doubt many of you have heard of. He's a performance philosopher, which I don't know if many people have got that as a job description. His name is Jason Silva, and I've been following Jason for about 5 years, and have been fortunate to have some communication with Jason and have shared ideas with him. And I'm hoping one day I can persuade him to come on the show. But he's famous for his work on television, but I prefer his work where he's just riffing intellectually. And this is a piece. It's only 3.5 minutes long, but this is a piece where he reflects on the future, the present, what it means, etc. Now, the one thing for non-American viewers, he's Venezuelan American, and you can tell that he's got that American wah thing about him. But chill with that. The messages is what I'd like you to listen to. So this is Jason Silva talking about the future and about the present.
One of the key buzzwords these days, the common prescription for a happy life, we are told, is learn to be more present. Learn to be in the moment, right? David Lenson once described anxiety as essentially temporal dislocation. Anxiety means you're not here now. You're concerned about the future. You're anxious about the past. And those things become like turbulence for the mind, making your flight through life an annoyingly terrifying one, constantly shaking up and down, fucking with your inner peace. And so it's interesting, right? Because if we're told that learning to be present is the way in which we may find peace and fulfillment, we're actually being asked to betray our biological hardware. See, what separates us from other animals in the animal kingdom is that we come equipped with this neocortical hardware, this neocortex, right? And what that does is it allows us to think in abstraction, to take ourselves out of the moment and conceive potentially of delightful future possibilities, pick the most amazing one and pull the present forward to meet that possibility. Our capacity to imagine, to design, and to create is a byproduct of our sophisticated, state-of-the-art, latest evolutionary model neocortical hardware. But it is that same mental capacity, that same piece of hardware that betrays us once we satiate our basic needs, right? It's like, okay, you got a job, you paid the bills, you're securing your physical safety, but this neocortical hardware is still thinking about the future, still evaluating scenarios, still assessing risks. We are the descendants of the most neurotic humans of the past, the ones that were constantly afraid, the ones that were constantly assessing threats and feeling anxious and thwarting those threats. So we've inherited this hardware that has made us in some ways achieve the impossible, soar through the sky, transcend space, time, and mind, collapse geography with our technological mediation. We are as gods, and yet our minds betray us. And yet 70 million Americans are medicated for anxiety. We live in the safest time in all of human history, yet we can't sleep at night from the amount of anxiety that we're dealing with. Depression and anxiety and these mental illnesses from carrying the burden of having to figure out what to do with our lives in a world that doesn't tell us exactly what to do, right? I mean, it's like society might offer a map or a model of how to live, but most of us have a sneaking suspicion that nobody really knows what they're talking about. And so, what do? Aside from fetching water and chopping wood and having kids and making love, what the hell do we do? And I'm not saying I have the answer to that question, but I know that it doesn't come just from being present, but perhaps from some kind of marriage, some kind of synergistic harmony between learning to occasionally be present, be here now, be in the moment, but also acknowledge that we are not just human beings, we are human becomings, and we need to constantly be probing the perimeters of the possible and bringing new spaces and possibilities into being. And so I think it's a marriage of both, and I think that finding balance between those two forces, I think, will take us the next leap forward. Let's see.
So that was Jason doing his thing. Julian, what did you think of that?
Oh, it's great. Very exciting.
He does. He gets into things, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's
very passionate.
He's quite often on other substances when he makes these videos, and you can really tell. But what I love about him is it's the intersectional nature of how he speaks. He talks about storytelling, design, technology. He's not afraid to be cognitively diverse in his thinking. So I love it. Well, I've got some good news, everyone. He's laughing on camera. I can see him, but you can't see him. The professional broadcaster and filmmaker who couldn't get his bloody kit to work, Tom Stanhope. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Am I now clear?
He's got the best camera. Look at this. Look, he's got the best camera setup I think I've ever seen in
Of
anybody
course he would. Of course
broadcasting.
he would.
Look at that. Look at him.
Look, at least it's frankly the least I can do, isn't it? Really, I think that was a great example of how you can be prepared and how the technology can sometimes just be there to give you a kick in the bum.
Julian said something brilliant. We were talking about that very thing when you went off. I was slagging you off, obviously. You were able to watch the replay. And Julian said, the great thing about the space story, how the Americans were designing pens to work in gravity, and the Russians just used pencils.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
We really should just be using. Yeah, well, that's it exactly. So all it took was just a restart of every single Wi-Fi connected device in the house. That seemed there was something kind of it was that easy.
Okay, so I tell you, we'll rewind a little bit, then we'll catch up. But it's your fault, Tom. All right. So, audience, I'm sorry, it's his fault. Tom, can you give the guys a little feel for the work that you've been doing, and how this story malarkey has become something central to your thinking and your work as well? Please, just like Julian did earlier.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I've been in the world of video for 20 years actually now, and storytelling is such an integral part of what I do. I've been helping business owners tell their stories for now literally decades, and the storytelling aspect of what we do has become so important. We now have the capacity to tell our stories live to audiences at the click of a button, which is something that was really, whilst not unimaginable, was just frankly unaffordable for most business owners, back when I started out. So this idea that we are building relationships through stories has become so much more important. And I think the more time we spend crafting our stories, understanding our stories, getting better at articulating our stories to the people who are going to benefit the most from them. If you can get the right stories to the right audience, there's no way that it's going to be anything other than a smash hit, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I think that's lovely, because it takes us into types of stories, and that's where I'd like us to go, guys, if you're okay with that. Because hi Joanne, thanks for saying hello. For some reason she's saying it's good to see you again, Tom. I don't know why, but I'd like us to move into this world of science fiction. Because when you were fiddling with your Wi-Fi, Tom, Julian and I were talking about the idea of world building and how that's a classic. I guess it's an archetype. Would you call that an archetype, guys?
Yeah.
It's a science fiction archetype, because not all science fiction is science fiction, which might sound a bit odd, because some of it is fantastical. It's not based on technology or culture. It's just it comes from, who just knows where it comes from, drugs, whatever it comes from, like what Jason was talking about in the video. What's your view on that, Tom? Can you start us, because you're late to the stories. You need to start doing some talking here, earning your money.
So I am a self-confessed sci-fi nerd. I absolutely love science fiction, and indeed fantasy. I'm a lover of books and and literature. But I think my first sort of real forays into reading came from sitting in my school library and randomly picking my way through the science fiction section of the library. I was sent off to boarding school, and it wasn't a great experience. So from the age of 8 onwards, I would spend quite a lot of time sat in the library. And H.G. Wells, and it was a very well-stocked library. And actually, there was, for kind of an eight-year-old kid almost, I remember picking things off the shelf and reading things, and reading 1984 at the age of sort of 10 and thinking, gosh, that was a bit dark, and absolutely loving it, but getting a sense of possibilities of fantastical vistas from these books. But I know you're gonna find this difficult. You were just saying about science fiction and science fantasy. So I would say the one piece of science fantasy, sci-fi fantasy that really was, as a kid of the late 70s, early 80s, Star Wars has been there as storytelling. But no, hear me out, Scott. It's not sci-fi, is it? It's not sci-fi. It's not sci-fi. It's entertainment, and it captured the imagination of the kind of the 5-year-old, 6-year-old Tom Stanhope, and it propelled him onto greater things, I think. But that for me, it's a really interesting piece of story because it steals from, as a filmmaker, if you look at something like THX 1138, which is proper hard sci-fi, that is a very bleak vision of a sort of a technological future, and it's really difficult to take that film and marry up against her. But George Lucas, back when he had when he wasn't surrounded by people who just said, "Yeah, that's brilliant, you should do that," was actually making films that drew on other.
Well, he did make one good film. He did make one good film, and that was it. It's a terrific film, but okay, let's not get to Star Wars. We'll end up
But what I'm saying is that actually that's something that draws from this. There's another tradition of sort of fantasy writing, which is like things like Princess of Mars, those kind of late 19th, early 20th century pulp fantasy, pulp sci-fi fiction. But people like Lovecraft, all these writers who laid the foundation for the sort of the sci-fi visions of the future. And for me, this kind of storytelling vision of the future, I think now is really relevant. You look at sort of things like I don't know. I mean, certainly Asimov and kind of Arthur C. Clarke and people like that who were writing in ways that the things they have written about are coming to pass. And I think if we ignore and write off the sort of the visions of science fiction writers, I think you're sort of closing yourself off from a worldview which can be really helpful as a way to understand the world we live in today and the world the way we're going forwards. Yeah,
that's a good segue to Julian, I think, because Julian, just to keep you in the loop, Tom, earlier, and I'll hand to you in a minute. Julian said earlier that he's interested in the more cultural examples of storytelling. There is that sort of technical design part, isn't there? The sort of certainly Asimov and others, but Bradbury was much more on cultural, as Le Guin, etc. But Julian, what does it mean to you?
What, science fiction?
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I was brought up on in the late 60s on lots of science fiction books. I'd like to see a lot of it's technological or action packed, like Star Wars.
Yeah,
I'd like to see more. When you say worlds, like inner worlds. As I said earlier, we're all trying to collaborate better. What in the future, if we all did the development we all say we're going to do, what would our relationships be like? If we could really be honest, we could look at our egos. We could manage and so do all this guff they talk about in leadership. What if we could? How honest could we be together right now in 100 years if we could have the vision of the culture that we're all talking about?
Yes. If I could add the two of you together, it would be the perfect sci-fi, wouldn't it? Because it would be technically interesting, but it would actually create a new world through the cultural development. What Julian said.
Yeah. I mean, there's a famous quote by Richard Rorty. He said, "Cultures change not through arguing well, but speaking differently."
Oh, that's nice.
So a vision of a culture in the future would have a language that we haven't got yet, but we might start picking up their language. The way you mentioned Minority Report, stimulated interactive technology, with his hands and his swiping and all that, the gloves,
Yes.
Well, that's just tech. What about people?
Absolutely.
Well, I think Huxley actually is, a really interesting take on that. So if you look at something like, we're looking at some sort of new world order and things like that. I think, and the sort of the subsequent sort of other books are where he sort of experiments. Like, he's looking to find ways to sort of think about the culture through the technology, but also not just the ways that kind of culture goes wrong when sort of technology is kind of applied carelessly or sort of or not carelessly. I think that point about sort of visions of a future in a world is wonderful. I think it's something that is very often missing from bad sci-fi, but the good stuff marries up that future vision of what might be with kind of how it changes the way we think and the way we see. And actually, Dan Simmons' Hyperion books are a great example of that. Those might tickle your pickle.
Where did you get that from?
Just made it up.
Oh, sure. I think that his grandmother, though, and I agree that they are great stories. But I think the one that I was talking to Julian offline about this earlier is Ursula Le Guin, because she talk about a prophet. There is a series on Sky called The Prophets of Science Fiction. There is actually a series about it. And she was talking, if you're interested in diversity and inclusion and you haven't read Ursula Le Guin, then you're missing out, because, one of her books, Left Hand of Darkness, that's what it's about. It is absolutely incredible. And it's about how she transported herself via a thought experiment to a world where there was no sexuality and where, technology had queerness. And it was the oddest, challenging, beautiful piece of writing. Have you read that, Tom? I think you probably have.
No, I haven't actually, but it's kind of it is on the shelf somewhere over there, and kind of. But actually, you know what? I'm gonna go have a read. Yeah.
What I love about it, and again, Julian alluded to this earlier. I love it when you get a writer who is willing to challenge his or her beliefs and transport themselves to another world. We talked about world building, and Ian M. Banks, the Scottish science fiction and fiction writer, his whole operatic sci-fi is actually called The Culture. Because he created again, it was quite technological in some respect, but there was a whole aspect to that about collaboration, community, progress. There was a whole load of that about knowledge and learning and how we could do it differently. And I think science fiction is brave in that respect, guys. I think it's one of the. There are other types of writing that cover this and these subjects, but I think sci-fi gives you permission, to look at something from another perspective and actually experience it. This might not be good for you. I don't know. You tell me what you think, but it's almost like you get permission not to be you when you're reading it sometimes. Even Star Trek does it. It's where I think Star Trek is completely differentiated from Star Wars, because Star Trek, in all its forms, whether you like the new ones or not, has always been about the people and about the cultures. It's not been about crash bang wallop technology. It has been about. It broke all the rules in the 60s. But the ethnic mix and the things that were going on in the stories was absolutely groundbreaking, and I think that's why I got drawn into it. Anyway, sorry, I'm prattling. What do you think, guys? Does that resonate at all, Julian?
Well, I'm thinking particularly, just personally, how much I love the film Arrival. And of course, I'm not dreaming of being able to travel through time.
Yeah,
but they explained in explaining this visual language that visuals aren't time-based.
Yes.
And they're syncretic, or the way the syntactic. You can see everything at once, and they're time independent. I just thought that was so inspiring.
It was glorious example. Tom.
Okay, well, look, I think that freedom of I really like what you said about it's giving you permission to speculate and imagine yourself in this world. And I think if you are transported, and whilst you are reading these things and these kind of wonderful visions, when it's at its best, it's both gripping, exciting, kind of encourages you to think differently, but there's all well written, but at the same time it gives you that sort of immersive experience. And there are those books I remember reading, and Dune is a particularly good example of this. I remember reading it for the first time and getting to the end of that book and just putting it down and going, I felt bereft that it had come to an end. And yes. As a vision of the future, it feels very, it's like set 10,000 years into the future, but there is little crumbs that you can sort of understand how that world was built from the kind of the culture we live in now. And this is one of the things that I love about this, is those writers who take what we've got now and sort of take that idea on a long walk and see where it ends up. And another particular favorite of mine is Peter F. Hamilton, who does write these kind of sweeping sci-fi sagas, but they're proper doorstep. And to be honest, that they're a bit pulpy in places, but he's a great writer. And actually, it's very interesting. One of his first published books, which is called Mindstar Rising. It was written in the 1992. It was published, but as a vision of the future, he paints this picture of a post-global warming UK. London is flooded. Peterborough has become the capital of the UK and is home to Britain's sort of space industry. Really interestingly, he uses the phrase credit crunch. He says that the UK economy is destroyed with the credit crunch after sort of, and he has all these amazing sort of predictions for the future, including Britain breaking away from Europe and descending into a state of kind of political chaos for a decade, and all these, So I was like, I read it again recently. I was like, oh my god, it's like, but at the time, he was taking ideas that were sort of in the kind of the cultural mix today, and he just sort of went with it, and that's what I love about it. They are thought experiments that entertain.
Now, I think there's a really nice link there to previous shows that I've done, where I often talk about the bridge between the different shows, how, one show is linked to another. And one of the things that I'm very interested in, very curious about watching at the moment is how we're writing. Now, this might seem anathema to some people, but it is, if you think about it, it's true. We're now writing more than we ever have in human history, right? The human race, because of social media and other things that are driving it, we're spending more time doing this than any other time in human history. We are connecting more with more people from different cultures more than any other time in human history. There is no debate about these things. They're just absolutely true. And what I'm interested in is how sci-fi is reflecting that, because it used to be, with the greatest respect to Tom, it used to be posh boys writing stories about, H.G. Wells, and it was. But now you're getting the likes of Arrival, the absolutely outstanding Interstellar, apart from the ending, which was a bit David Bowie, I thought. But the writing is changing, and the short story format, which is the king in sci-fi. I mean, although the doorstops that you were talking about, Tom, is right. That they're very popular, but certainly the vast majority of sci-fi movies that you see in the cinemas come from short stories. So Philip K. Dick being a good example, where his books never did that well, to be honest. He never became wealthy or even famous when he was alive. But now you can hardly turn on the television without Philip K. Dick being on the television, and I think that's interesting. So I'm excited about a whole new generation of cross-cultural people, writing sci-fi, to see where they take it. And I don't know if you've been touched by this yet, but the other thing that's really interesting at the moment is the rise of Chinese and Russian sci-fi. It's incredible. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. And it's very different to Western sci-fi, certainly classic Western sci-fi. But you've now got, particularly in the Chinese, I don't know if you've read any of it, but there's a lot of that about human design in terms of, societal design and about how that could be changed with technology, or how that could change with, advancement, evolutionary developments in how human beings are. So there's a whole vista here. I mean, this is a never-ending story. I don't think you're ever going to get like you get in like other genres, like the Western genre or the love story genre. It's just circular. It's the same old crap over and over and over again. Whereas in sci-fi at the moment, I call this the Babylon 5 model. I don't know if either of you understand that, but Babylon 5 is my favorite sci-fi TV show, and the reason for that is it was about culture, and it wasn't like Star Trek where they found everyone's dressing the same. You had the people who didn't breathe oxygen and etc. in Babylon 5, where that was rare on Star Trek. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm just blethering, but I think there's something to that. I really do think that the cultural stuff is really important.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. I think sort of sci-fi has for a very long time been seen as a very broadly Western white male preserve, and like you say, you've got these sort of foundations of kind of future thinking that are kind of very culturally rooted, I think, in, I suppose, if you're going to be in kind of empire and sort of power-based views of kind of it is being generally speaking written by people at the kind of who are at the top of the top of the power structure, and I think that gives a very different perspective, and not a healthy one. And so you look at War of the Worlds, and that's kind of a response. You read that as a response to sort of imperialism, all sorts of things, and there's. It's a complicated book. I mean, it's in terms of once you start to get it, but I think once you start to broaden your reading and broaden your viewpoint, I think this idea of cultures that sort of absorbing and benefiting from cultural, other cultural kind of viewpoints of the future, I think is an incredibly valuable thing for us to be doing. And I'm very guilty of frankly, I'm very guilty of not reading widely enough, because I've made that mistake, and it is something I would like to sort of put right as quick as I can, frankly.
Yes. Have you got a perspective on that, Julian?
Which part?
So the fact the genre, if you like, the writing is changing in terms of the number of people writing that are there from because of social media, because of it is largely technologically. I guess that's the engine behind it. But we're getting more opportunity to different types of people are now getting engaged, different cultures are now getting engaged in that genre, and I don't see that in many other genres.
No, I personally, I don't read a lot at the moment. I listen to a lot, but it does. I mean, certainly in filmmaking, the science fiction films being made all around the world, they're all. You can start to get a sense of how other cultures see science fiction.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm guilty. I've never seen Stalker.
Have you not?
Crazy.
No. Yeah, good movie. Very good movie. It's quite obviously he was on something when he produced it, but very good movie. But now I'd like to take us down because we're coming towards the end. But there's two movies that one is a personal story which I just want to tell about. It's only a few seconds. But the other one, I'd like this to come back to Minority Report for a very specific reason. But the one film I mentioned it before, Interstellar. Now there's a line in that movie which is this line: empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. And I was actually one of the baddies in the film, if you like, one of the antagonists. I don't know if that's what you call them in science fiction, but it said that, and that I think was the genesis of why I'm doing this broadcast, because I remember hearing it and it jumped out of the screen. It was when they were on one of the option planets, the films about finding a new planet for humans to go to because they've screwed up the Earth's environment, and everyone's dying because there's no oxygen left and no food left. And that really hit home with me, because I I've always liked reading, and I've read a lot, you know, and I'm not read as much. I'm like Julian, I listen more now than I read. But I've read a lot of books, and I've read a lot of sci-fi books. But I think that empathy thing, that empathy point that the author makes there, it's just one for people who listen to this show regularly to remember that, you know, the more empathetic we come, the further we can see, the deeper into other people's shoes we can get. And I think that was a beautiful quote, guys. Have you come across that quote? Obviously, you've probably
it's very good. In fact, can you pull it up? Could you put it up again?
Of course, yeah.
Because it just an aside. It reminds me they did research in the Second World War about why men fight. Why did you fight? And it wasn't for Churchill or democracy. It was the man in the next foxhole.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
very good, very good. That's a cracking example. And I'm hopeful in that, Julian, because that the war connection there is good, because I think that, well, I hope that as we get more empathetic towards people that we've never met or are not likely to meet, because of the connectivity and the storytelling, it's going to lessen the chances of us killing ourselves. You know, I think it's important for societal development.
Well, I mean, you know, if we talk about storytelling and science fiction, and you could start talking about the narrative and look at the narrative that's been created by the Republicans or the right wing in America, and there's a lot of hate. And so what narratives can we create that actually stimulate, help us understand people who are different from ourselves?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Narrative with a purpose.
Yes. And that takes us on to the final thing I'd like us just to have a brief chat about. And it's a film that was based on a Philip K. Dick short story, and it's the film Minority Report. Now, have either of you read the short story?
No,
I haven't actually.
There's not a lot to it, to be honest. It's about precognition. It's about identifying someone who's about to commit a crime, and they catch them before they do the crime, right? So that's actually a bit of a sci-fi trope. I don't even think Dick was the first person to write about that idea. But what's interesting about this film is that, and if you're interested, folks, there's an academic called Liptak, unusual name, that's how I can remember it, Liptak, who did a PhD on this, because Minority Report and its type of world building, its narrative about society, about crime, about fairness. It's the technology that they use, the stuff he did with his hands and the biomimicry and the driverless cars, the drones, the gesturing systems. All of this stuff has come to pass. And it's one of the best examples of how sci-fi can have it's very close to reality. You know, it's only, you can imagine it, couldn't you? In 10 years' time, that's the world we're living in. We've already got those, you know, we've got the touch screens, and we've got the drones and the driverless cars. It's only another step in the imagination, guys, to imagine that we start to think about, you know, consciousness and behavior. I don't know what you think of that, but I think it's a really challenging piece of work.
I think for me, this is sort of the crux of it. It feels like at the moment, you know, we are, and probably in reality, this is how people always feel about the moment of time they're living in. But it feels like we're just starting to kind of ramp up a very steep curve. There's a lot of things coming together. There's kind of biotech advancements. There's kind of there's you know, we're on the cusp of what might be an age of quantum computing, whatever that means. We've got people talking about machine learning and AI. All these things feel like they're converging at a moment to produce a future that is almost beyond the capacity of sort of previous science fiction to kind of compute. Because like you say, Minority Report, all this stuff, it feels like it's coming to pass. It's like, it feels like you look at it and you go, yeah, with the exception of the whole precog thing, you could look at it and go, well, so what? So 2021, you know, and it depends very much on. I think we're getting to a point where science fiction has to be more expansive, more ambitious in its understanding of where this stuff takes us, in order for us to potentially navigate through this kind of terrifying tree of possibilities. Because we look at what's coming down, you think there are so many ways we can screw up as a species. It would be really, yeah.
So I always sort of seem to go to other extremes. So bring that right down to where I live in South London, in Southwark and Lambeth. I would love to support the council there to make a film of what social care and social housing could look like in 10 years and give it to the government.
Yeah,
that'd be great. That's science, culture, fiction, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I mean, you look at what's Saudi Arabia is trying to do with the city NEOM. This effectively building a technological city from just from whole cloth. They're making something from scratch, and issues of kind of horrible political kind of ideologies aside, the ambition of this city is to create somewhere where care is delivered by AI and robots. Do you think is that the vision of the future we want? Do we want our elderly to be looked after by robots, or to be looked after by caring humans? I know which I prefer, to be honest.
Yeah. God.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, but it's funny because you reminded me they're doing the same in China with climate change. They're building self-sustaining cities that don't hit media here, but they're building these massive 500,000 people cities that they're running them on sunlight. They're not running them on any. It's incredible. But I mean, it's a weird dystopian environment. It's interesting that they're doing it. Yeah, very interesting. Well, look. Guys, we've really come to the end. We're over our time. I knew we would go over the time, but not for you, Tom. Obviously, you're still under the time.
I'll just keep going, shall I? I'll do my. I'll blether on.
I'd like to thank you both for joining me, because it's been fascinating, and I nearly say this every week. We could talk for hours about this because there's so much depth in it, but. I'm grateful for your participation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's been a
I
pleasure.
hope again we see you back again, because there's more to talk about. So if everyone could just say thank you to the guys, and I'll finish us off in a sec. So thanks, guys, and I'll speak to you later.
Thanks a lot. Nice to meet you, Tom, and nice conversation.
Good to meet you too. Thank you so much. Thanks, Scott. Bye, guys.
Right. So I'd just like to finish with some of the thinking that I have in this space that I think is really important. I do think that this empathy question that Julian and Tom riffed on is really important. And in the workplace, probably more than ever, we need to start understanding how other people's feelings are, how they're living their lives. And one of the things that I think most of us believe is going to happen in the next few years is that we're going to be spending more time apart. Whether you like cities or not, one of the things they do once you've gone through the horrible commute is they bring us together. And I don't believe technology is going to replace that. I think it can in little bits, if it's very well done. But I think that continuing to tell stories, your own stories, is how you're going to create empathy with those people who are not always with you. And I actually believe that successful people and successful organizations are the ones, certainly in the next 5 years, are the ones that are going to reflect back to the experience we're all currently living and sharing together with coronavirus, and tell their story and tell good stories of how they felt about it. So I do actually think it's quite important that companies and individuals take this pretty seriously, folks. I really do believe that. And my parting words, as always, are these. Watch out for stories this week. Because as we've just discussed in what I thought was a lovely conversation, those stories can change the world. And although, as Jason Silva said in the video, that we're living in the best of times, you wouldn't always know it, but we are living in the best of times. I believe that we can make the next times even better through our stories. So thanks for tuning in. I'm back next Tuesday at 11:30 when my guest will be Tom Morley, who joined me once before, but we got interrupted by technology. Tom's got a big fancy studio. I think there's a theme here. So Tom's coming back to do the second half of his show next week. So we're going to be looking at music and storytelling. So thanks ever so much for joining. My name is Scott MacArthur. This was Artefact Live. Thanks very much, and I will see you next week.